Mike Ferguson, thank you very much. You can catch Mike every afternoon from 4 till 6 o'clock on 93.9 The Eagle. We are very proud to be a part of this evening's event with the League of Women Voters, and very grateful to have our candidates join us as well. We move from the City Council candidate forum now to the mayoral election, and we have a full slate of candidates this year. Everybody wants Darwin's job, apparently. Well, that's just fine. Darwin's made it look so easy, everybody wants to jump in on that. We will run with the same format, and let me verify, 90 seconds for the opening and closing comments, 60 seconds on the answers in between. We'll have a green card that says you have 30 seconds left. The red card means time's up, and when I get a chance, I will tell you time and interrupt you if you're moving forward. We'll start at our audience's left end of the table with Sid Sullivan with their opening comments, and then move as we did with the City Council on down the line with each question. So we begin with the opening comments. Sid Sullivan.
Thank you, Tom. I'm Sid Sullivan. I'm a candidate for mayor of the City of Columbia. I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for sponsoring this and the Eagle Radio for broadcasting this. I come to you with 14 years of experience in big business. I had worked for a company called Roche Diagnostics. We developed a product and brought it from 0 to $40 million in 10 years with a lot of hard work. I also come to you with experience in criminal justice. I worked for the Circuit Court of Cook County for 16 years and saw a lot of the criminal justice issues in the bigger cities of this country, working with many law enforcement officers, with many in the court systems, the prosecutors, judges, as well as the academics that understood the issues of crime and the areas in which brought people to crime. I also come to you from a family of planners, urban and regional planners. My wife, my brother-in-law, my niece and nephew are all planners, and I've had a long interest in terms of the way cities grow and develop. I have volunteered in this community as well as every other community. I've worked for the Downtown Optimist. I'm currently a vice president. I've also been, and currently am the chair of the Boone Electric Trust. More information can be found on my website, which is simply sidsullivan.com. Issues that I'm concerned with are the financial character of the city as we're moving forward in this area of the Great Depression, areas of development, the way we're growing and the way we're living among ourselves.
And time.
Finally, of governance. Thank you.
Opening comments from Jerry Wade.
Thank you. What is this campaign really about? It's about a real choice, the direction of our city's future and how we get there. Whose city is this? Whose future is at stake? This campaign is all about your future. It's about all of Columbia. Your choice is clear. In experience in city affairs or my experience in economic development and creating jobs. Candidates who say they want to get tough on crime but continue to manipulate public perception by misusing crime statistics even after being provided full, accurate data. Or my belief that neighborhoods deserve policing as much as downtown, and that limited police resources should be directed to areas of most need, your neighborhoods. My vision for the city means development projects that make us proud of how we grow, projects that fit with the natural features of the land rather than leveling the land to fit the project. There is a real choice on April 6th. I have cut no deals to gain the support of any individual or group for this campaign. I will never manipulate public attitudes and perceptions for personal political gain or for the economic well-being of my campaign donors. I am already doing what the others claim they want to do. The job of mayor is a full-time job. It is not an entry-level position. I am prepared to begin work on day one, not on the job training that the others will need. This is your community too. Help me make sure it remains a community for all Columbians.
Columbia's mayoral candidate forum and opening comments from Paul Love.
Good evening. My name is Paul Love, and I'd like to be your mayor. We'll get to decide that on April 6th. I became involved because someone was killed just a few blocks from my house. I started looking around, and I certainly perceived that we had a problem with crime. We can talk about the statistics that are involved with that. At the back of the room, actually I guess on the outside, there's a table. You'll find the statistics from 2001 to 2009 regarding the crime statistics in town. If you look at the very last column, it's called a crime index. That's how they index the number of crimes you have and the various types against the population that you have. They'll warn you up front that those kind of statistics should not be used to compare between cities due to the differences in laws and the way laws are enforced. However, I think you will find that those are a very valid comparison for crime within the same city. You'll notice that I've highlighted a number if you pull one of these sheets at the very upper right-hand corner. That number would be 4419. That is the highest crime index in the last 10 years. I've got to tell you, the other thing that I've been kind of looking at is that we need to make sure we're very careful with how we spend our money. Every dollar that we get came from a taxpayer. It doesn't matter whether it was just local money. We need to make sure we're spending it well. They gave it to us in good faith, and we need to make sure we're spending it in good faith. We're going to face some tough times in the next year. The city has a shortfall in revenue. The state has a huge shortfall in revenue, and I sincerely hope the federal government stops printing additional money. One of the things they've talked about is trying to bring high-tech jobs to this town. I am the high-tech candidate in this group.
Time. Opening comments in our Mayor Forum, Dr. Bob McDavid.
Bob McDavid, I'm the chairman of the Board of Trustees of Boone Hospital. I began my career in Columbia after my wife and I, with 2 small children, chose this town, as each of you did, because this is a great town. I practiced obstetrics and gynecology for almost 3 decades while we raised our kids. In 1998, I was elected by you to be one of your 5 representatives to oversee the hospital you own, just a half-mile east. 3 years ago, I was elected chairman of the Board of the Trustees. I stand by my record as your elected representative. I stand by my record of dealing with the unfair arrangement we had with BJC Healthcare, and I stand by my record of getting the community together so that we could achieve a substantial improvement. I'm proud of Boone Hospital's culture of customer service, its culture of excellence, its culture of compassion. I want to see the City of Columbia be a customer service organization, and I want to bring that culture to city government.
And finally, opening comments, candidate Sean O'Day.
Hello, my name is Sean O'Day. I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for having us here, and 93.9 The Eagle and Cat TV for broadcasting. I want to talk about 3 things. The first one is civil liberties. Yes, it is important that we keep our people safe, but it is equally important and paramount that we keep them free. You cannot have a productive workforce. You cannot have the type of innovation that you need to actually stimulate the economy by shackling the people in it. Second of all, I want to talk about transparency within our government. Columbia runs on a city manager system, which seems to work pretty well for the most part. I'd like to see to it that the people are represented by the people that are elected into office by them. And the third thing I want to talk about is sustainability, and I mean this in 2 different forms. It is critical that we keep environmentally sound and sustainable practices. I think regardless of how you view climate change as to being anthropogenic or not, as in human-made, our resources are very limited, and we need to be better spending them and using our vast energy income. Economic sustainability is also paramount, and I think by keeping as much money here, by having businesses not just come here but start up here, and keeping our money here and not sending it out of state, out of county, and I think we can better sustain our society, and I think especially in economic times like these, it's important.
We'll begin a question and answer session portion of the forum at this time, and we'll start off with Jerry Wade. And our first question, submitted by one of our audience members here at Stevens College in the auditorium: how will you seek diverse citizen input and foster positive racial relations in your leadership of our city?
Well, I would begin by doing what I have been doing. I'm sorry Mr. Dudley doesn't think he's well represented. It's with the 4th Ward Councilman. Twice a month, I have an open meeting, and he never did show up to talk to me about what he thought he needed representative. I will continue being accessible to all Columbians. I will continue those twice a month meetings in comfortable places. I will be open to listen. I will be out with different groups' activities and find places to engage with people all over Columbia. And the question of race relations is a continuing critical question for Columbia. We have to find the ways to do two things with race relations. We have to make sure that our ordinances are adequate for the formal kinds of violations of proper relationships, but we also have to start bringing people together to create a different kind of culture of engagement that values and celebrates diversity rather than dishonoring it.
Paul Love, how will you seek diverse citizen input and foster positive racial relations in your leadership of our city?
Let me take that question kind of going from the back. The first thing I'll have to tell you is that we're going to need to make sure that we enforce equitable race relations. We can't allow discrimination to happen. Long term, this is something that needs to be fought in the minds of the children. There are people out there now, there's not a whole lot we can do other than keep them from making a negative impact and teaching future generations. As far as how will I interact with the people, many of you can catch me out there at charity fundraisers for one event or another. The other thing that we need to look at as far as promoting involvement of our citizens, 35 to 40,000 people who live here are students. We do not listen to their vote. We do not draw them into our government. Most of them do not vote. Our expected voting age for the April election is 65. We need to get these people involved. We need to get the people who go out and work every day involved. I do appreciate the civic pride of our senior community and making sure they get out for every election. We need to make sure that we instill these values in our children, and we need to bring these values out amongst ourselves.
Bob McDavid, how will you seek diverse citizen input and foster positive racial relations in your leadership of our city?
First thing you have to do is respect the cultural diversity we have in this town. We recently had a celebration for an Afro-American employee, Joyce Cox, who in fact was, I always say, the first person I worked for over at Boone Hospital. She's worked there 51.5 years, and we had 200 people over in Rainey Hall to celebrate her work at our hospital. It goes to showing a respect for the culture of success that we need to develop. There's an achievement gap. The people in the public schools are dealing with that. As I listened to James Witt, one of the school board candidates, talk about his son was expected to go to college when he was in the first grade. That's an expectation we need to bring to all minority children. We need to do it through modeling efforts.
And time. Sean O'Day, how will you seek diverse citizen input and foster positive racial relations in your leadership of our city?
As far as seeking input, I think it's important and crucial that you be accessible on all fronts, whether that's in person, by telephone, email, through various internet forums such as a website or Facebook. I think it's crucial that you have input from the citizens and have forums where opinions can be expressed. As for racial relations, I think one of the key things that I think is an issue as far as racial relations is the economic disparity between races. I think we know that crime isn't caused by race; it's caused by economic circumstances. And for us to view it in that sense, I think would be the best way to ensure racial equality and to enforce those laws equally.
And to Sid Sullivan, how will you seek diverse citizen input and foster positive racial relations in your leadership of our city?
Just a short while ago, we had a diversity day on Martin Luther King's birthday to celebrate the diversity of Columbia. Unfortunately, this is just a one-day event year, or it happens one day a year. And many people felt that this was very entertaining, but when we leave there, we don't celebrate that diversity, and we need to. Columbia is a very diverse community, very diverse in ideas, very diverse in attitudes. We have a black population, but we also have a Jewish, a Muslim, a Hindu, a Hispanic, Hispanic community, and there are many others that live in our community, and we need to really exercise that openness of diversity. Some of the issues we have that have been raised in this particular campaign are around crime and criminal justice. The fact that we have offenders in this community, we need to develop a policy in which we deal with law enforcement. Some of that in terms of who we bring into the system, others in terms of who we get out of the system, in terms of reintegrating people back into the community after they have served their time. This is an area of extreme importance to the black community that feel that a lot of the law enforcement issues that have been raised is raised against the black community.
And time.
Or other.
Thank you, sir. You're listening to our 2010 Columbia Candidate Forum on Hot Talk 93.9 The Eagle. We're live from Stevens College in the Windsor Auditorium with the League of Women Voters. It's important to mention, by the way, to our radio audience, those here have already seen this. Sal Nuccio is not with us this evening. I'm not just skipping him over. We wish him good fortune and health, and hopefully he's well wherever he is at this time. We'll move on to our next question. We'll launch this to Paul Love. What will you do as mayor of Columbia to help bring jobs and companies with well-paying jobs to Columbia?
One of the things I'd like to do is attract technology jobs. The problem is that Columbia isn't suited for just many industries. A lot of construction jobs would not fit well with our green environment. We would receive feedback from the community that would be negative. High-tech jobs are the kind of jobs that have low environmental impact, they're high-paying, and they take advantage of our well-educated community. We have a lot of things to offer these people. One of them could be a mayor with 20 years of history in the industry who's currently active in that. Once again, we'll decide that on April 6th. You'll notice that if you look back through the last few forums, we recently passed a subsidy, or not a subsidy, but we're going to allow high-energy users to purchase powers at a wholesale rate. You'll find that was one of my campaign platforms early on, and it did pass in the City Council about 2 weeks ago. I'd like to say that if you'd like to bring high-tech jobs to Columbia, perhaps a mayor who's a high-tech kind of guy could help you get that happen.
Dr. Bob McDavid, what will you do to help bring jobs and companies with well-paying jobs to Columbia?
If I'm elected mayor, I'm going to be an activist mayor. The mayor serves on the board of READY, which is a development corporation which is largely private, but it has had a big role in trying to lure the data company to Columbia. I'll be an activist in going through the companies that are already in Columbia to try to retain them. ABC Labs is the consummate knowledge-based company in Columbia. Has 330 employees, 30% PhDs, 30% masters. They almost left Columbia 7 years ago. And they almost left Columbia because they perceived indifference by city government. We have to be invested in those people. We have to make sure they succeed. I will be an activist in dealing with university. They have talent, they have brains, they have entrepreneurial initiatives. We need to keep those people in Columbia. We need to set the, fertilize the field so that it can be successful. Because if they prosper, our city will prosper.
Sean O'Day, what will you do to help bring jobs, specifically companies with well-paying jobs, to Columbia?
Well, these gentlemen are going to talk to you about tax incentives and power incentives, which I think are great things. I think they're necessary tools in order to bring businesses in. You have to apply those on a case-by-case basis, though. What I'd like to see is infrastructure be built up to the point where it does become attractive for people. That means sewers that you can plug into, a transportation system that can get you from point A to point B. You know, these things are going to be crucial. In order to have any kind of business, you have to have roads to support them. You have to have, you know, buses that run back and forth. You have to have sewers that are, you know, respected by the entire community and that are paid for. And, you know, it's crucial. In order, if you build it, they'll come.
Sid Sullivan, what will you do to help bring jobs and companies with well-paying jobs to Columbia?
We're all interested in increasing the economy here in Columbia. I think it was mentioned earlier that the school bond issue is a great way to enhance that economy with the $120 million bond issue that will possibly be turned over in a multiplier effect with the construction jobs that will bring in and the improvements to that particular neighborhood. When we talk in terms of the economy, we look at different standard industrial codes. The area in which we're doing the best in is the science scientific area, which could be the ABC labs, which we've increased over the last 5 years by 143%. Other areas that we look at are the accommodation and food services, where we need to keep the festivals in this town to provide the kinds of dollars from outside the community. In terms of a high-tech industry, every city in this country and in the world is looking for that. It would be a great boon to our economy to bring that in, and we need to do everything we can to do that. Other areas we could look at is developing Columbia as a retirement community.
Jerry Wade, what will you do to help bring jobs and companies with well-paying jobs to Columbia?
Well, we have the interesting situation to where every person up here will be successful. And that's because of what we have been doing to create the basic tools to be successful. I've been working for the past 3 years to move us from being 20 years behind to where we're now pretty close at a level playing field with not just similar-sized cities, but who we ought to be competing with. Research Triangle, Austin, Texas, San Diego, the high-tech knowledge centers. The tools for success you put into place as part of your infrastructure. We have done that. We are now have so many projects that are ready people are working on. They can't hardly keep up. We are being talked about globally as a data center. We are creating high-tech successful companies right now. We, in fact, are creating as many jobs as we have been losing. I am the person that I think know what's going on. I have the experience, and we need to continue. We have to stop.
And time. Our next question this evening, and by the way, for those just tuning in at home, we do have timekeepers up front. I'm doing my best to watch them, and sometimes I'm into the answer so deep. The next question will start off with Dr. Bob McDavid. What is your position on surveillance cameras downtown?
Well, I'm the only candidate who has endorsed them. I just came from the Downtown Safety Summit over at the First Baptist Church. They have 8 recommendations for downtown safety, the second of which is to install safety cameras. You know, I think I think the council missed an opportunity to engage Karen Taylor to solve this problem through cooperation, through consensus. A downtown safety summit should have been initiated by the council, not after Karen Taylor went out and got 3,000 signatures to create a referendum. So I view the position we're in as a failure of governance.
Sean O'Day, what is your position on surveillance cameras downtown?
My position is that they are just that, surveillance cameras. They're not safety cameras. Statistics show over and over again they do not prevent crime. For 1 in every 1,000 cameras that they had in place in London, they solve 1 crime a year. You know, the ordinance states specifically that the chief of police will have to give the location of each of those cameras. The people that plan out crimes, the people that we want to catch with these things, they're going to know where they are. They're going to be able to see them. They're going to be able to just put on a mask or obscure the camera. It's not going to be effective, and it's a service that it's a handout to a few a small percentage of our businesses, and I don't think it's a good use of our city money. I'd rather see, you know, more officers on the ground. The best way to solve crime and to prevent crime is education and communication.
Sid Sullivan, what is your position on surveillance cameras downtown?
The surveillance cameras came as a result of a rather horrendous crime that happened downtown. It happened in a garage in a place that was not well trafficked. There were cameras in that garage that did not deter that crime. They did assist in the apprehension of the offenders. I am currently opposing the use of downtown cameras. I do not think they're effective at all. If the downtown merchants want those cameras, they have the ability to pay for them, or they have the ability to set up a separate taxing district. But what we have found since the particular event in the garage, that the enhanced police force downtown has actually deterred the crime. Many of the downtown merchants' complaints are with the broken plate glass windows as a result of drunken people coming out of their bars at night and starting fights and breaking the windows. The police deployment has cut that back dramatically, and I think that we have the wherewithal to deter crime with the increased amount of police.
Jerry Wade, what is your position on surveillance cameras downtown?
That is well known. I have opposed surveillance cameras downtown, but let's put a little more context into it. I was the one that went to Bill Watkins and recommended that they needed to have a downtown summit and develop a series of recommendations, and that the surveillance cameras should be a part of that so it could be evaluated for its fiscal and law enforcement effectiveness as a part of a total set of options. I asked Karen Taylor before she ever started her crusade to focus her energy in providing leadership to that, and that is not what happened. We instead have ended up with a contentious issue that is being primarily used to manipulate votes for the mayoral race rather than to deal with public safety issues in downtown and the rest of the community.
And our final answer to this question will be from Paul Love. What is your position on surveillance cameras downtown?
Ben Franklin once said, and you'll have to excuse me if I paraphrase this, anyone who's willing to trade a little bit of liberty for a little bit of safety will soon lose both and deserve neither. The decision on this camera issue will be resolved in the election. I ask you to think about what it is that you're willing to trade up for what it is you're afraid of. Many people have pointed out that while the cameras may not solve crimes, they certainly aid in the identification of the person who committed the crime. What the camera did not identify was the individual who walked by, who did nothing. For us to be safe in our homes and safe in our town, we need to look out for one another. We need to be responsible for our neighbors. I'm not saying if you're a little old lady, you need to pile in with 7 thugs. But what you might do is pull out your cell phone and call the police. You might shout out for assistance. We can't stand idly by while crime fills our town.
Our next question, we will begin with Sean O'Day. Beyond job growth and beyond crime reduction, what would be your next highest priority for our city if you are elected?
My next highest priority is the sustainability of our community. And I think there are several ways we can improve that. Environmentally speaking, I think it's going to be crucial that we invest in alternative forms of energy. Columbia is a service economy. We're one of the best places to open up a restaurant. You know, we have all of this waste that's just going out the door and not coming back. You know, that's stuff that can be used to create biofuels that could fuel public transportation, that could fuel our fleets, that could fuel our fire engines, our police department. And furthermore, we have, you know, out here on Discovery Ridge, we have wonderful facilities that might help us with, you know, that sort of research, and especially because they're coming up with biological things all the time, algae that create ethanol, you know, way more productively than corn can. You know, I think that's crucial, and our public transportation is going to be a crucial step in the sustainability of our environment and in the sustainability of our city. You know.
Time. Sid Sullivan, beyond job growth, beyond crime reduction, what would be your next highest priority for our city if you are elected?
There are many priorities, but in terms of the city government, I think that we need to work on governance. We have a great deal of discussion in terms of the way City Council operates and the way we work with the actual administration. One of the problems we have is that City Council is not really set up for the whole area of setting policy. The way our government works is the City Council sets up, passes ordinances, passes a budget, and establishes policy. And that's the way we guide our city manager. And I think we've been laxed in terms of the way we're setting policy. We have not developed a set of standards for itemizing our minutes, so we file our minutes by subject matter rather than by chronological date, so that we know how we've decided something in the past, so we don't just set ad hoc policies. We have not set a policy book. If I were mayor, I would present an annual set of policies that the city has actually passed and provide the guidance to our city manager so that he can do that and use our city employees as advisors for this.
Jerry Wade, beyond job growth, beyond crime reduction, what would be your next highest priority for our city if you are elected?
I think there are actually 4 areas of reasonably equal priority. We have to move them forward together. We talked about a strong economy. We talked about working together to reduce crime and increase public safety. We need to simultaneously move forward with building strong neighborhoods and with building a whole new set of development policy and procedures. With strong neighborhoods, we've got a good start. We have instituted a neighborhood leadership program and Keys to the City, both of which I helped initiate as ways of creating many leaders and as ways of creating opportunities for city, private sector, and neighborhoods to work together. We need to add additional support to build the incredible assets that are not well used yet at the neighborhood level. You create the future by finding unused assets and building them stronger. And then finally, with development policy, we need to do growth management planning and a series of things that bring us into the 21st century.
Paul Love, beyond job growth and beyond crime reduction, what would be your next highest priority for our city if you are elected?
We need to look carefully at where we're spending our money. We need to look at how we're enforcing our ordinances. Right now, there's more than $1 million a year in sewer that doesn't go collected because we choose not to enforce the ordinances. We recycle glass in the city, or we sort of do. We pay to collect it, we pay to sort it, we grind it up, and then we throw it in the landfill. I know there's at least one company who's interested in starting a company out there, starting a business to recycle that glass. If we're going to pay to recycle the glass, we need to make sure that we actually really recycle it. We're not doing it just to make us feel better. We need to make sure that we spend these dollars. They are ours. We need to treat them importantly. We can't just waste them.
Dr. Bob McDavid, beyond job growth, beyond crime reduction, what would be your next highest priority for our city if you are elected?
We had substantial budget cuts last year, social services, infrastructure, as sales tax declined. We have $380 million that rolls through the city every year. It's absolutely imperative that we value the public's money preciously. Uncollected sewer revenues, each dollar that we don't collect is a dollar we can't use for social services. We have opportunities for productivity enhancements. We increase productivity when we give vouchers for trash bags. It's a great idea. It's $300,000 a year. You know, if we'd have done that 10 years ago, that's $3 million. These things are there in the government. We need to work to make a more efficient operation. We need to create value and customer service. There are many opportunities to save and to enhance our services.
We have time this evening for a few more comments for our mayoral candidates, and that'll be followed by closing statements. A reminder that following this candidate forum, our third portion this evening will take off, and that'll be a discussion on Proposition 1, the downtown camera proposition that will be on the ballot on April 6th. We'll bring us back up to this end of the table, begin this question with Sid Sullivan. What did you learn from the recent forum with those dealing with disabilities?
There's a lot to be learned from people with disabilities in terms of the way our city works and the way it functions. Some of it is in terms of the accessibility of the city and the way people get stranded. In the winter times, we have snow plows that clear the street, but they put all that snow onto the sidewalks. People can't use the sidewalks if they're in a wheelchair. The problem of blind people trying to navigate in downtown. There aren't the bumps for people to get around. There are also some mental health issues. I think many times our disability community and the city at large doesn't understand the whole area of mental health. And we really are lacking that mental health in the city of Columbia. Boone County Hospital got rid of the mental health psychiatric unit 2 years ago, and we're left without that. It's a problem that we have and we need to deal with. The other areas of disability include many of the, out of time.
Out of time. Jerry Wade, what did you learn from the recent forum with those dealing with disabilities?
The community of people with disabilities want the opportunity to live a full, productive life, and to have that opportunity, they want to be at the table and they want to be listened to. The fact is, every one of us want the opportunity to live full, productive lives, and maybe we need to take the lesson from the community with people with disabilities, that we all need to start listening to each other. We need to make sure all different groups are at the table, listen to, and tell us how we can better help them live that full, productive life.
Paul Love, what did you learn from the recent forum with those dealing with disabilities?
My initial response when asked how Columbia rates with regarding to the way we treat people with disabilities, I said I thought that Columbia does a very good job in terms of the way the Midwest handles things, but that there's room for improvement. I was informed in no uncertain terms that there are quite a few issues that simply because I don't see them, if you don't see those issues, you don't notice them. I step over a crack in the sidewalk. If you're in a wheelchair, you can't do that. We need to work with the people who are in our community and find out the restrictions. We're going to face some tough times, and we can't fix everything. But if we work together, we can find the most important places to spend the limited dollars that we will have available.
To Dr. Bob McDavid, what did you learn from the recent forum with those dealing with disabilities?
I learned that our disabled citizens want to feel that their elected officials are engaged and sensitive to their needs. That was a very clear message. We have a disabilities commission. It's important that all of our commissions be treated with great respect. We have 12 members of that commission, 7 of whom must be disabled. I look forward to relying on the input from and suggestions from this commission and plan to stay totally engaged to this segment of our population. These people have needs, and the same needs and desires that we do, and they need to have the opportunity to have them expressed.
And finally, Sean O'Day, what did you learn from the recent forum with those dealing with disabilities?
I unfortunately was not present at this forum. Scheduling error was made, and I apologize. The proper people have been fired. You know, I think it is very crucial that we keep an open mind with disabilities. You know, I think the things that all of these candidates have mentioned are very important. In particular, this might be a little anecdotal, but Sid mentioned mental disabilities, and my brother is a disabled veteran. And, you know, so it's something I deal with every day, and I plan on taking the time to listen to all of the concerns, whether that disability is blindness, a physical handicap, or a wheelchair having, you know, mental disability. I think each component of it is just as crucial, and to listen to those commissions will be very beneficial to our city council.
Next question, submitted from our audience. Teens are seen out and about late at night. Do you feel that Columbia should provide activities for teens? And if so, what should those activities be? We'll start with Jerry Wade.
Should we provide activities for teens? Absolutely. What should those activities be? Let's bring them together and ask them.
Paul Love?
It's a very good question. I'm looking at probably something at a sporting event. We have lots of basketball courts. We've got many parks. We've got a lot of soccer fields. I think these are one way that we can teach people to work as a team and get them involved. At the other hand, I think we need to look at how late some of these kids are staying out. We force the kids to go to school. We need to make sure they're getting home in time so that they're ready to go to school and learn as much as they can the next day.
Dr. Bob McDavid, teens are seen out around at night. Is there something we should do to provide activities for teens? What should they be?
I think the easy answer is midnight basketball. But truthfully, most of us know that have grown up in families where our parents told us nothing good happens after you pick the time. And we know that inherently. We need to engage parents into activities that are not just sports related. There are other ways achievements. There are other ways to success, whether it's through cultural activities, whether it's through academic activities, whether it's through activities such as the high steppers. I mean, there are a lot of activities that can take place during the day that engage these kids, which can lead to success. Let's focus on these activities rather than focus on sports.
Sean O'Day, is there something we should be doing for our teens, some activities, and if so, what activities?
I actually agree with Dr. McDavid as far as academic concerns go. I really do think that it's crucial that we educate our society. I think, you know, in the long run, it prevents crime. In the long run, it prevents, you know, people being, it prevents unemployment. It prevents all of these things, and I don't know that we're doing necessarily a good job, not necessarily as a city, but as a country in doing that and fulfilling that promise that I think we give to any child that's born. You know, I really do think there are great programs as far as science education and as far as entrepreneurship that can be definitely applied on a citywide basis, because they're applied fairly effectively on a nationwide platform.
To Sid Sullivan, teens out and about late at night, do you feel that Columbia should provide activities for teens, and if so, what activities?
Well, as we face these tougher economic times, I think we'll find more and more kids out at after dark. Parents working 2 and 3 jobs to provide the food and lodging for their children don't always have time to support the kids. I think we need to look at activities. One way is to ask the kids. Another way is to consider a teen center where kids can interact, not just with sports, but other kinds of activities. As we find kids in the street, I think we may want to take a look at using street workers to engage the kids, to find out what the issues are. If there are kids that are leaning toward delinquency, to have those street workers intervene and work with the families. We can provide a variety of services. We have church women that are willing to work with kids, and I think we need to engage not only the city services, but also our faith community in terms of working with kids that may need some adult intervention.
You're listening to the 2010 Columbia Candidate Forum. Our mayoral candidates are on the stage at this time. We'll continue with a couple more questions, and then we'll go to our closing comments. Our next question, we lead off with Paul Love, and I'll read this verbatim first time through, and then we'll shorten it after that. Our road network is a mess. Columbia should have had a 20-year plan 35 years ago. We are 20 years behind now. How do we address this so that 20 years from now, we are still not 20 years behind the needs of our citizens to get across town in a safe and timely manner? How do we address that to make sure 20 years from now, we're not still 20 years behind? I need Michael J. Fox to be up here and help with a little Back to the Future. To Paul Love.
Part of it's planning. We need to plan our infrastructure for where we plan our developments to be. We can't allow development to happen in areas where we aren't prepared to support the people. One thing that a lot of people don't realize with the upcoming school ballot issue is that may cause a realignment of where we're going to be spending our limited road dollars in the next year. The roads where they're proposing to build the new high school are not suited for heavy construction, nor are they suited for the heavy bus traffic that will require. We're going to have to wait until a little bit after the election to find out whether that ballot passes before we decide where that money is going to be spent, because we're going to need to make sure that our kids have safe roads to travel to school on.
Dr. Bob McDavid, how do we make sure that 20 years from now we are up to speed with our infrastructure and our roads?
That's a question that was being asked 80 years ago. Those of us that were here in 1970 remember when the Columbia Public School Board put Rockbridge High School out in the middle of nowhere, and they then dictated 4 decades of growth south. Now the Columbia Public School has decided that the best place for their 3rd high school is on St. Charles Road, and most certainly that will direct growth north and east. There's no way around that. There's no way to stop it. It's going to happen. We have become reactive. We don't have the ability to tell the Columbia Public School Board where to put its school. We will respond. We will develop the infrastructure to support it, and we will have to support the growth as it goes east. That'll involve Highway 740 extension. That'll involve widening WW. It's somewhat reactive, but that's the way city is functioned historically. I wish we could get ahead of it, but we're going to have to try to stay up with it.
Sean O'Day, how do we tackle this problem with our roads so that in 20 years we're not still 20 years behind?
I think this process is already at least somewhat underway. There's a comprehensive plan being made for the city at this moment, which I think is crucial. But it's crucial not just to have a plan, but to execute that plan. And part of that is going to be by fostering economic growth and bringing money into the community to fund the infrastructure that we so desperately need. But also, I think, I said public transportation earlier. I'm sticking to that. I really think that by getting more cars off the road, it's going to make it easier for those who do choose to drive to be able to do that in a timely, orderly fashion. We've also got a system of bikes and trails that I think are also going to be crucial in that infrastructure.
Sid Sullivan, how do we plan so that 20 years from now, the infrastructure of our roads is not 20 years behind?
The current rate of growth in the last 15 years has been about 2% a year. We've grown tremendously in that period of time. We've actually increased the size of Columbia from 45 square miles to 65 square miles. We have thought about roads last. In terms of developing roads, we need to look in terms of, first of all, a land use plan of where we're putting residential areas, where we're putting our high density, where we're putting our employment and commercial, and then we think about roads. How do you connect all these together? Unfortunately, we've done the roads first and then figured out how we're going to put these other things in place. So we need to have a street policy in place, as well as a land use policy in place, and as well as a public facility policy in place. And it's only with that can we coordinate with the school district in terms of where they're putting the schools. In terms of that northeast area of Columbia, we need to realize that if we continue to grow the way we are, we will increase our population by 40,000 people in the next 20 years. And we need to plan for that.
And to Jerry Wade, how do we plan out our roads so that 20 years from now we're not still 20 years behind?
The current pattern for Columbia is to grow by reacting to whatever real estate development projects the developers bring before us, and so we end up with projects scattered all over and an impossible infrastructure situation to be current on. There are two things we need to do. First of all, we've got to implement growth management planning, create a solid set of data for the city to make its investment decisions so that our infrastructure investments are planned, are focused, and that our development follows those growth plans. The second thing is we have to change the financing pattern. Columbia's development fees for projects to fund community impact is about 1/3 of comparable communities. And it's not just roads, it's all services. It's fire, it's police, it's social services, it's roads that these projects impact, and there needs to be a far more equitable distribution of funding.
One final question before we move to our closing comments from our mayoral candidates. We'll begin this with Dr. Bob McDavid. What is your view of the use of TIFs for development?
Tax increment financing can be a useful tool to spur development in a blighted area, an area that has no economic use to the city. You allow them to plow some of the tax back into the capital used to construct the entity. The design, then, the purpose of it is then to produce an ongoing revenue-generating structure as the TIF runs out. The TIF needs to bring value to the community. That's the bottom line. We can't give away too much. We have an obligation to make sure that competing companies, industries are not disadvantaged with TIFs. They're used all over the country. They're widely used. They will be used in the future. We just have to make sure that when we face one, that it does bring value to the community.
To Sean O'Day, what is your view of the use of TIFs for development?
I do think that TIFs can be a vital thing in order to bring in economic development. However, the question is, how do we use that? And it has to be used, on a case-by-case basis. It has to be applied. So, the question is, does it benefit the actual infrastructure near where you're using this tax increment financing? And what I would say is, on anything that benefits our infrastructure, such as power or a light or anything that's beneficial in fostering economic activity, but it has to be something that's applied on a case-by-case basis. I could come up here with examples all over the place, but until we actually see those, we won't really know if that's something that's going to work in that situation or not.
Sid Sullivan, what is your view of the use of TIFs for development?
I agree with the use of TIFs, but I don't agree with the way they've been used. When they're used for a single business or a single hotel, we have an 80 to 90% failure rate. We need to look at TIFs. They are not only for blight, but they are for conservation of a neighborhood. They are also for economic development. And one example I would give in terms of the new high school, if we look at that 4 square mile area in which the Joint Planning Commission has developed a plan, we could use the TIF in that whole area in terms of providing providing for the infrastructure. In terms of the value of land right now, we could capture that, the return on, or the increase in the taxes to provide that kind of infrastructure, and we could also work in cooperation with developers in terms of providing incentives for them to build the kind of area that would benefit all of Columbia, in particular that particular area. So TIFs can be useful if they're used properly. If used improperly, we have a number of failures in this state to prove it.
Jerry Wade, what is your view of the use of TIFs for development?
Well, I either have the pleasure or the curse of being the only one up here with a record. I voted for the TIF for the Tiger Hotel. Most communities have used TIFs for retail. That's why there's been 80 to 90% failure rate. TIFs should be reserved for economic base, except in extremely rare occasions. And I believe they should be restricted at this point to special projects that focus on infill downtown, building downtown into a new kind of economic dynamic for Columbia. And 3 criteria have to be met before I think they can even be considered. First of all, it has to meet the but-for, which means that except for the incentive, the project would not be built. If it meets that, then it has to be a catalyst project that will stimulate significant change in the downtown economy, and it has to give a demonstrated high return to the community investment, not just to the private investment, but also the community investment. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. You mentioned your record. You're talking City Hall, not State Pen. I'm sure that's what it is. Go to Paul Love. With that is the final answer for this question, our final question. What is your view of the use of TIFs for development?
I think they are a valuable tool. I think Columbia feels a little bit burned about the way the TIFs have happened so far. I'd advise us not to swear off using a tool just because it didn't work quite the way we intended it to. Sid mentioned a possible use for a TIF would be out at the new school. It seems like a good idea, but we don't want to rush into that. We need to make sure, as Jerry was pointing out, that not only do we get benefit, but that it is a catalyst for the area. I think we'd have to have a very select set of circumstances for that to happen. I just don't want to encourage the developers to all go dashing out looking to file for a TIF out in that area. But we need to keep our minds open, and we need to use the tools that are available to build our city.
And we'll wrap up our second portion of the 3 segments of tonight's forum with closing comments from our mayoral candidates. We'll begin with Sean O'Day. And this will be 90 seconds. Is that correct? 90 seconds. Thank you.
When asked why I'm running for this mayoral seat, and the question comes up very often. The reason is that I really do care about Columbia. I care about the future of this town, and I don't mean to be crass here. It's a shame that more young people don't get involved, because 20, 30 years from now, we're still going to be here. We're going to have to deal with the repercussions of any decision that's made by anyone on city council. And these are the things that affect us every day of our life. This is our sewer, this is our roads, this is our water, our light, this is our police department and fire department. It's absolutely important, and I'm thrilled to be a part of this process. Why you should vote for Sean O'Day is because I can take an innovative look at our city government. I haven't been involved in this, and part of the problem I think we see is when you repeat something over and over again, you're going to continue to fail if it fails over and over again. So by taking a different approach to things and by seeing things possibly in a different light, I think I can be very crucial to the dialogue and to the future of this city.
Sid Sullivan, closing comments this evening.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters and Eagle Radio and Cat TV for presenting this opportunity for all of us. In terms of my involvement, I've been involved over the last several years in terms of writing articles, trying to create the dialogue in terms of the way the city's growing, the way we're developing, and the way we need to look at our future. Basic ideas in terms of if we're growing at a 2% rate, what does that mean, and how do we plan for new schools, how do we plan for new roads? And I've published these in the Missourian and the Business Times, and tried to interact with City Council and interacted with the Planning and Zoning Commission. And I appreciate the time and the effort that has gone forth in this particular forum where we're dealing with actual issues. Over this campaign, there's been a lot raised in terms of the crime issue. I think that we do have a slight increase in crime, but over the long haul, it has not been a great increase in crime, and I think it tends to do a disservice for the city of Columbia when we focus strictly on crime. It is scaring people in the community. It also scares people from moving to this community. We are taking steps to take care of our crime, and we need to downplay that and not keep increasing the amount of visibility that crime is having on our community. In terms of the experience that some candidates are purporting, all of us have experience. My experience happens to be in business, it happens to be in finance, it happens to be in criminal justice, and I've got to stop.
Thank you. Jerry Wade, closing comments this evening.
There is much at stake in this election. The outcome will determine the path of Columbia's future. The voters of Columbia are being bombarded with mega signs, data skewing, sound bites, and fear-mongering in an attempt to sweep into office a slate of candidates selected, managed, and paid for by a handful of self-appointed power brokers who want to control this community for their personal profit. These would-be power brokers are the controlling members of the Central Missouri Development Corporation and their friends, a handful of large business owners and their friends, and a few members of the board of directors of the Chamber of Commerce and their friends. You have a real choice. You can choose to have a city led by a mayor who serves your interests, a mayor who has a lifetime of hands-on experience in economic development, the kind of development that brings new money and quality jobs to the community, one who has already been involved in working for you to bring these jobs here now. You can vote into office one who understands and has experience in the city's fiscal management, who has faithfully and consistently supported the men and women on the front line for your public safety, one who listens to all, who makes decisions based on the welfare of all, and who is solidly prepared to lead Columbia into a future we can all be proud of. A dear friend told me, Jerry, you must trust the process. The strength of democracy lies in the wisdom of the voters. I trust that process. On April 6th, let me know what your choice is and which Columbia you want.
Paul Love, closing comments this evening on our mayoral forum.
I think you've had the chance to look at us all this evening and hear what we've had to say. You've had a chance to see how we would have a chance to represent the city of Columbia, because that's a big part of what the mayor is. He's an icon for the city of Columbia. You've also heard discussions about crime. I think each of the candidates have made very clear their standing on crime. While I don't necessarily support all the methods that may be endorsed to fix the crime problem, I am very seriously interested in fixing the crime problem in town. So ask yourself, do you feel there's a crime problem? Please try and vote accordingly. We're interested in bringing high-tech businesses to town. I think we've covered that fact. I'm already out there working in the industry. I know these people locally, nationally, and internationally, and I believe that would be an asset to bringing these kind of businesses into town. We've talked about how people respond to their government and what they expect from them. I've been very clear that, unfortunately, unlike many other candidates, I can't promise you a lot of programs coming up in the near future. We are going to have a lot of tough times in the near future. What that means is we're going to have cuts. I've made several unpopular statements throughout the campaign when I explained to people that we're just not going to get some of the nice things we've had for some of the last few years. We may have to cut back on some of the art and the entertainment that we've had to maintain basic services. I wish I had a lot of cheerful things to tell you, but frankly, the job of mayor is not so fabulous. I'm willing to lie to you to get it. I have to ask you to look at the people and make your decision accordingly. I don't ask that you vote for me. I ask that you look at all of the candidates. Look at them. See how they respond. Listen to their views. Vote on the 6th.
And time. And closing comments, last but not least, Dr. Bob McDavid.
My wife and I have been blessed to live in this great town. And it's certainly an honor to be one of the 6 candidates who will be honored to be your mayor in 2 weeks. I stand by my record as your representative of Boone Hospital. I stand by its culture, I stand by its quality, I stand by its compassion. We can do better in Columbia. Columbia's a great town, we can do better. We can do better with crime. Nobody is saying that we don't have a crime problem. We might bicker about the numbers and the statistics, but there are people who don't feel safe. If you feel safe, that's great. there are people who don't, and we have to address them. 501 violent crimes in a year is too many, and we have to stand behind a disciplined, highly trained police force. Economic activity is what pays the bills. It's those taxes that fund the city revenues which provide the services we need, whether those services are social services or the roads and infrastructure that we need. We've got to increase economic activity. We can do better with governance. We can run this large organization better. Every dollar we save is a dollar we can divert to social services. It's a great town. We all know it's a great town. I think we can do better, and that's why I'm running for mayor. Thank you.
As moderator this evening, I have the prerogative of asking one last question before I release these gentlemen off the stage. You can just answer with a show of hands. If you guys are elected mayor, will you be riding a bicycle to City Hall? Anybody? I'm not seeing a lot of hands up there. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank our candidates this evening. All right, coming up in a moment, we'll have a debate here on our stage with what has turned into a heated and very interesting and educational issue, and that is the Proposition 1, the downtown camera ordinance. Before we start that, I'll pitch it back over to Mike Ferguson down on my right. Mike? All right, Mike, thank you very much. We are live from Stevens College campus. We want to thank Stevens College as well. They are such a great part of our community, over 175 years, and a beautiful facility, facilities plural, but specifically here in the Windsor Auditorium that they've allowed us to use with the League of Women Voters. I'm Tom Bradley. You're listening to Hot Talk 93.9 The Eagle, and possibly around the world on theeagle939.com. We're moving on to our final portion of tonight's forum, in which we're going to discuss Proposition 1, the downtown camera ordinance. And we're going to have a little bit of a different format for this, in that we're going to create more or less an open discussion between myself and the pro and the con on stage. Is one sound more positive than the other? Maybe I shouldn't refer to one as a con. On the stage with me from Keep Columbia Safe, Karen Taylor, and from the ACLU, representing the ACLU, Dan Viets. Ladies and gentlemen, please a round of applause for their participation this evening. And we'll start it off with an opening statement from each. Ladies first. Karen, if you would.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having us tonight. I'm the mother of the victim of the brutal attack last summer in the parking garage downtown. And lucky for us, that attack was caught on a city-owned video camera, which led to the arrest of 5 of 7 of my son's attackers. Now, Adam was knocked unconscious, and he doesn't remember the event. So the cameras were critical in aiding into the arrest of those attackers. Within 6 hours of seeing the video, the police had arrested 3. Over the next couple of days, 2 more turned themselves in. The cameras aided in the arrest, they aided in prosecution, and they aided already in one of the parole hearings for one of them that was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Adam and I have attended that hearing, and we know that the video aided in extending the time that young man has in prison. We want to talk about Proposition 1, which is the safety camera ordinance, and the proposed ordinance would authorize the police chief to deploy safety cameras in the downtown area to enhance public security. The proposed ordinance contains procedural requirements about deploying the cameras, including public notice and an opportunity for public comment. There are lots of statistics about the usefulness of cameras, and you'll hear probably some of those tonight, but we know that many cities in our nation and abroad use cameras effectively. And many of those cities are continuing to enhance their technology, which would lead us to believe that they've found some benefits from those. We know cameras are useful. We know that they aided in the arrest of Adam's attackers. And we can name many other incidents in Columbia where cameras have been beneficial. The Walmart shooting, the Red Roof Inn murder, the Waffle House shooting just a couple of weeks ago, and numerous incidents on campus, including the recent Cotton Ball incident and an assault, which was only led to the arrest because of the cameras.
And Karen, I'll stop you there for the opening statement, and I'll turn it over to approximately 90 seconds for Dan Viets.
Thank you. I want to thank the League of Women Voters for sponsoring this event and the Eagle for facilitating it. And I want to compliment Karen Taylor and her family and associates who have worked very hard to put this issue on the ballot and put it before the voters of our city. But nonetheless, I and the ACLU and actually an alliance that we've now formed with a couple of other groups and many individuals, the Boone Liberty Coalition, Liberty on the Rocks, and other individuals have joined with the ACLU to form a group that we call Keep Columbia Free. KeepColumbiaFree.com is a location where you can find many of the studies that we have found and that almost uniformly indicate that there is virtually no positive impact on crime, either deterring it or solving it, from the use of surveillance cameras on public streets and sidewalks. And I think that's an important distinction to make. Councilman Scala has made that point before. We're not talking about taking cameras out of the parking garages. That's a high-risk area, higher risk for property crime, really, than for personal assaults, but obviously personal assaults can and do happen. You know, the incident with Karen's son was, thank goodness, a very rare incident. That is not something that happens very often in downtown Columbia. Downtown is actually a relatively low-crime area, and all of the statistics I've seen bear that out. Councilwoman Laura Nauser has made that point very effectively. The statistics available indicate that roughly 93% of the assaults in Columbia occur outside the downtown area. So why would we focus on the downtown area? Why install cameras there? Now, I want to emphasize, too, we're certainly not objecting to private companies and private property owners installing their own surveillance cameras. We encourage them to do that.
Dan Viets, thank you for an opening statement. Now, in all the issues I've ever stumbled across in my life, this one has had me going back and forth across the fence so many times, maybe not feeling permanent on one side than the other, but boy, I'll tell you what, it's really easy to get me to think, yeah, that makes sense, and wait a minute, what they said makes sense too. And I think at this portion tonight, you're going to find some of my personality and perspectives and opinions probably getting interjected in here, but I'm going to open it up now with a little bit of a forum between the three of us. And I'm going to ask questions back and forth, and anybody can jump on these. And if you really want to interrupt each other in a polite manner, I'm open for that too. Karen Taylor, does it really deter crime to have surveillance cameras out there? Does it really?
I believe there are studies that show it does. There are cities that have used that effectively. Chicago, one of the studies in Chicago shows that it has led to a decrease in crime. Cape Town, South Africa shows a decline of 43% crime in the area after installing safety cameras. But even more so, even the fact that they help solve crime. And in Columbia alone, one of the attackers of my son had 16 prior arrests. And it seems to me that it's pretty reasonable to think that that man is taken off the street. He's not out there committing more crime, which in effect does deter crime.
Dan Viets, you have statistics that say surveillance cameras do not deter crime?
We do. And again, I can't recite or read them to you this evening, but if you go to keepcolumbiafree.com, you'll find all of those studies. One of the best ones was done, in fact, by staff people at the ACLU, not doing original research, but reviewing all of the considerable body of scientific research which has been done and which does exist. Again, uniformly, the conclusion, both of studies in the United States and studies done in other countries, indicates that cameras used on public streets and sidewalks have virtually no impact on either the crime rate or the rate at which crimes are solved. Now, in the incident at the parking garage here, it's my understanding that the police were familiar with, indeed, as Karen said, that some of these individuals had extensive prior criminal histories. The police recognized them because they were, at least in some cases, familiar faces, and that helped. But that's often not the case. In fact, more often than not, it is not the case. The cameras simply aren't nearly as effective as one might assume.
You know, in the opening statements, Karen, you had said that there were several, within 6 hours of that horrible ordeal with Adam, who was with us here in the audience tonight, as well as other family members like Lonnie. There must not be any NASCAR going on this evening. 6 hours after the incident, there were already arrests being made. Is that correct?
6 hours after the police saw the video.
After they saw the video, I'm sorry. Is that typical?
I can't answer that question. I don't know. But I do know that without the camera, it would have nearly happened. It would not have happened so quickly.
Let me throw this out to both of you, and either one can jump. But do we know how many cameras right now, in 1 week's time, may be videotaping? There's no tape being used anymore, I think. The video cataloging Columbia, events in Columbia, people in Columbia. Do we have any idea how many cameras in 1 week's time may be flipped on in our town? City-owned cameras.
I don't know a total number, but I do know that the new City Hall has 43 cameras inside and cameras actually on Broadway. And I do know that Boone Hospital Center has 270 cameras.
Those
so
cameras,
our county-owned hospital.
I don't want to interrupt, but those cameras are not, however, focused on the public streets and sidewalks, and that is a fundamentally different proposition. You know, the fact is that as Columbia's population, as development takes place, the population grows, almost by definition. That's what's happening in our city. That's why the crime rate has grown slowly, incrementally, but surely, because we have development, we have growth, population grows, and crime grows. But there is no crisis in crime in this community. In fact, the statistics in many serious categories indicate that crime peaked a couple of years ago, and crime in 2009 was considerably below what it was in 2007.
Is that one of the differing points between the two of you and the views you represent? Are there views that we do have a crime problem and someone else's view that we don't?
Right.
No one says there's not a crime problem. That is a straw man argument. I cringe every time I hear someone put up that false choice, do we have a crime? By definition, crime is a problem. You know, that is a false choice.
I think we'd all agree that any crime's too much crime.
However, there are citizens in Columbia right now that feel that over the last 5 to 10 years there has been an increase in crime in our fine hamlet.
Right. And I actually asked for the downtown police department to give me some crime statistics, which they have done. And one thing that's important to note about these statistics is that we want to compare apples to apples. We want to compare the same boundaries that we were looking at a period of time ago to today. So I asked for that because with the geographic policing, the boundaries of downtown have changed. And so I said, please compare apples to apples for me so that I can see what's happening. And while crime in and of itself may be down, the disturbing crime is up. In fact, assault arrests are up 23% in just 1 year from 2008 to 2009. Now, that's the kind of crime that disturbs me. I don't want petty theft. I don't want graffiti. I don't want those things either. But I'm talking about the violent crime that impacts our community at large.
But while assault arrests are up, I think the police would agree that that does not necessarily indicate that assaults themselves are up. Their arrests are up in downtown Columbia for many things, including minors in possession of alcohol, because there's been more intensive policing in downtown. Anytime you focus more police resources and more police officers' time on a certain area, there will be more arrests, but that does not mean that there are more of the underlying crimes taking place.
You make a good point in that policing is really important. And you may have heard that the police chief had mentioned that he would like more officers, and of course he would, and I would too. But that's not a realistic thing when it comes to budgeting. A police officer is going to cost around $125,000 a year at a minimum, with salary, benefits, training, equipment. And when we're looking at these cameras, it's another tool to aid law enforcement. We're not saying it's the end-all tool, we're saying it's another tool. And one of the things that disturbs me the most is that, and I do support geographic policing, but since Adam's attack last June, our geographic policing in the downtown area is down 3 officers. 2 have been promoted and 1 was called up for active duty. It takes time to train and get officers on the street to do what they need to do. Our officers downtown are actually working at a deficit right now. There's not as many there. Cameras would aid them. They'd be there 24/7. Again, another tool to aid law enforcement.
Every time I hear that phrase, another tool for law enforcement, you can bet that that means almost every time that there's a sacrifice in civil liberties taking place. That euphemism of another tool for law enforcement almost always translates into a further erosion of personal liberty. Now, I'm intensely aware of the fact that our Supreme Court tells us we have no expectation of privacy in a public place, but I think everyone in their heart feels otherwise. We all believe we do have some right to personal privacy, even if we're out in public. And I don't want to live in a society, and I don't want Columbia to be a community where our government keeps us under constant surveillance. That's what's being proposed here. The private cameras are a different proposition, Tom. That is a fundamentally different proposal, and we're not objecting to that.
There would seem to be some loss of a freedom possibly with this, that there may be some level of reasonable privacy even on a public street, where if somebody follows me too long, I can go ahead and file a court order saying this guy is bugging the tarnation out of me, and yet I was on a public street. So there may be some loss of freedom. Is that something that you would admit to, Karen?
Well, actually, that was important to us in crafting the proposition, and the proposition says that the cameras must be conspicuous and shall only capture images that can be seen from public places where there is no reasonable expectation of privacy. So we're not talking about hiding these cameras away in areas that have a reasonable expectation of privacy. And the other thing to note is the ordinance says that the recordings will only be kept for 60 days unless there is an ongoing criminal investigation. And at that point, then they would be recorded over and used. Now, we have to think about what's reasonable. The police are not going to be sitting there watching these cameras 24/7. There's not the resources to do that, nor is it practical. They'll only be used in a case such as Adam's incident, where they come forward and they are just incredibly valuable to the law enforcement as another tool.
But you know, one of the fundamental differences between private and public cameras is the images produced by public government-owned cameras are subject to the state sunshine law. That means that anyone who requests copies of those recordings must receive them. That is a matter of law. And I want to point out in the city staff's analysis of this ordinance, it refers to the various alleged restrictions on the availability, that they should only be available to the private contractor the city works with and to criminal justice and people authorized. And immediately following, the city attorney says this provision would be in conflict with the state sunshine law. That's absolutely right. There are provisions in this ordinance which have already been, in the opinion of our city attorney, found to be unconstitutional, or not unconstitutional necessarily, but illegal under state law. Some of these alleged protections simply are not going to hold up. And the idea that anyone who wants to obtain copies of these can do so for any reason whatsoever should cause everyone to have some misgivings about this. I also want to address the point that the ordinance does indeed require that the cameras be placed in conspicuous locations. If anyone remembers seeing the cameras that were on Broadway briefly last year, they are indeed conspicuous. They are ugly. They are intended to instill fear and intimidation into citizens who see them. And the fact that these cameras must, under the ordinance, be made conspicuous, I believe is going to give exactly the opposite impression from what the proponents hope they'll do. They're not going to make people feel safer. They're going to make people feel like this must be some kind of a high-crime district, or else why would we have these very conspicuous cameras all over?
Karen, address that, and then pitch it back to me, and I'd like to bring up again the Sunshine Law
Well,
issue.
and that's what I wanted to address really was the Sunshine Law. First of all, you're right, they do fall under the Sunshine Law, as do all of those city cameras that are there today. The cameras that caught the attack on Adam are under the Sunshine Law. And my understanding about the Sunshine Law is that when someone requests it, then they are obligated to pay the expense of pulling the video and the staff time, and so there would be some costs involved in that. So, you know, those cameras that are there today in the parking garages in City Hall are under the Sunshine Law today. So I don't see a whole lot of difference on these additional cameras. Now, when you talk about the cameras on Broadway, I do want to point out that the ordinance was written that the deployment of the cameras will be at the discretion of the police chief to deploy them. And we aren't saying that they're mobile units. We're not saying that they're the units that were even tried last year. We want a recommendation from the chief on the best tools that will aid his unit.
You know, if I could address that, it brings up a point that has not been discussed, to my knowledge, at all in this debate. That is that the form of this ordinance sets a very dangerous precedent. It declares that a city department head will have the authority to overrule the elected city council, indeed to overrule the city manager chosen by the elected city council. It gives direct authority to a city department head to do as he sees fit, regardless of what the elected leaders of our community think. And that is not the way we normally run city government. That is a radical departure from the way that our city government normally operates, and it is unprecedented.
We talk about being watched, the big brother. We're watched right now in the parking garages. I didn't realize until this past week that we have cameras on the lapel or area thereof of our police officers downtown. Does that weird you guys out at all that those are there?
Not me.
Well, I'm concerned about that, but not as concerned
Karen
about...
doesn't have anything to hide. I got a few things to hide out there. And
you know, that idea that if you don't have anything to hide, you shouldn't object to being on camera 24/7 seems to be kind of a product of this reality TV mentality that I think people are falling into these days. You know, there is just a simple concept of human dignity that requires that we have some independence, some freedom, some personal space, that we have control over our immediate environment. And that is violated. That is violated when the government puts us under constant surveillance.
you know, it's interesting to bring up the phrase human dignity because I think that's probably within both of your positions. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't that be true?
I believe so.
You mentioned, go ahead, Dan.
Well, I was going to say, I in no way, obviously, would defend, nor would the ACLU or our allies defend the actions of the criminals who assaulted Adam Taylor. I'm a criminal defense lawyer, but I choose not to represent people who are charged with offenses of that nature. I feel very strongly about stopping violence, but I also feel very strongly about the need to preserve the precious civil liberties that we still have, and they have been eroded dramatically in recent years. This is another brick in the wall. This is another step that the government's taking to take away that which is most precious about our being Americans, our personal liberty. The fact that our emails and the privacy of our electronic communications were violated by the federal government a few years back and probably continue to be, that our telephonic communications are likewise being violated by the federal government, that our local police department and sheriff's department, without any public discussion or debate, are implementing a program which will use roving surveillance scanners on police vehicles to record the whereabouts of every motor vehicle within view. And these are capable of recording virtually any license plate that's anywhere within the perimeter of the area visible to any police car. That'll keep not a permanent perhaps, but a database of where we all are at all times of the day. And this government surveillance has just gone overboard.
Karen?
You know, I've said this before, and I'll repeat it, but in a perfect world, I wouldn't want cameras either. But we don't live in that world, and I know that firsthand. You know, I've watched crime, I read it in the paper, for a long time, and in fact, I'm ashamed to say, but until it happened to my own family, I thought, well, isn't that too bad? But then it did happen to my family, and I know that if it happens to mine, it can happen to anybody. And so when I look at that, I think, you know, I don't really like going through airport security either, but I do because it allows me to be safer on an airplane. And so I do believe that sometimes safety has to trump, and that's what I believe in this case.
I want to ask you guys for closing arguments or statements in a moment. One last thought. Isn't it true that, Karen, this would be the beginning of what you would like to see? You'd like to see even more cameras. And isn't it true, Dan, that this is the beginning of what you would fear, which is even more cameras?
Yes.
Well, no.
Yes, indeed.
I don't think I've ever said more cameras. I think what I said was I wanted to provide tools to aid law enforcement, and we believe this is one step. After the election, no matter what happens, Keep Columbia Safe is not going away. We want to continue to work with law enforcement to provide whatever we can to aid them. And it could come in a variety of ways. It could be discussions about neighborhood watch. We could have discussions about curfew. There are a number of things that we believe need to happen to keep our city safe. And so Keep Columbia Safe is going to be an ongoing entity after April the 6th.
Well, Keep Columbia Free will be as well. And there is necessarily a tension between safety and liberty. And I concede that living in society means that we do make compromises. Any of us have perfect and complete liberty. But those sacrifices that we make should be ones that are only based on careful and reasoned consideration. And in this case, it's not even a close call, because the science, the evidence is that these cameras will not help to reduce crime. They will not, other than anecdotal, there's no evidence these cameras will reduce crime or help solve crime. They will reduce our personal freedom and liberty.
That sounded like your closing statement, which I don't want to take away from you. But the question that was on there is one of your greatest fears that there will be more cameras if these are on there? Just yes or no. Is it one of your greatest concerns?
More government cameras. Inevitably, there will be more private cameras, but we do not have to accept our government instituting this kind of surveillance.
Before I give it to both of you guys for the closing, we'll let you take it first, Dan, since Karen started us off on the opening statement. Some of the cameras that were mentioned earlier on some of the city buildings, they are showing public property. We do have cameras on the new City Hall building that are shining straight out onto Broadway. Is that correct?
No, that is not correct. Those are not focused on the public streets or sidewalks. I have that on the authority of members of the council.
Okay.
Well,
I thought I saw a shot already.
I think that's a good question to ask. Yeah, I'd like to see that.
All right. Then closing statements. We'll start with Dan Viets from the ACLU.
Well, thanks again to the League and the Eagle for giving us this opportunity to talk to the people in our community about this important issue. But the bottom line here is, as I said just a moment ago, that when it comes to considering whether the trade-off here of liberty for security is a good trade-off, we have an absolutely empty pan on one side of the balance, and on the other side, we have a very definite and a very perceptible loss of personal liberty. The fact is that there are a great many people in downtown Columbia who do not want this measure to pass, and it's been misrepresented that the SBD, the Special Business District, voted unanimously for this. They didn't at all. There's been no vote downtown. The board of directors of that group did indeed vote for it. That's a very, very small number of people. I think the vast majority of people who live and work downtown do not want this measure passed. It will not reduce crime. It will not make anyone safer. It is at best a feel-good measure, and instead of feel-good measures, our government should be providing us with honest and straightforward, truthful information. And the truth is these cameras are not going to help anyone.
Karen Taylor.
We know last June 6th, our world turned upside down when we got that phone call that Adam had been attacked. It was something we couldn't fathom. I grew up in Columbia. I raised my children here. Adam went to the University of Missouri and had been downtown by himself many times. It was a horrible, horrible incident, but it opened our eyes to the kinds of things that are happening in our city, and it made us realize that we needed to take a stand and try to do whatever we could to keep our community safe. There are lots of statistics about how cameras work, and all you have to do is read the newspaper or listen to the news on a daily basis to hear how cameras aided in the arrests of individuals that would otherwise not have been arrested. We've been endorsed by a number of organizations: the Columbia Chamber of Commerce, Crime Stoppers, the Professional Firefighters Association, the Columbia Police Association, and the Missouri Student Association. So those folks have taken a study of this issue and have come out publicly to endorse us. We know cameras work, which is why we and 3,000 other citizens signed the petition to create the ordinance for Proposition 1, which is on the April 6th ballot. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Karen Taylor and Dan Viets, please give them a round of applause for being here with us tonight. Thank you all for being here as well. It has been our incredible privilege and treat to be with you and with the Columbia League of Women Voters. Thank you to Stevens College for stepping up, and not just the facility, but all the incredible staff and equipment that they lent to us as well. Thank you. I'm going to pitch it back down front to Mike Ferguson with the Eagle. Okay, good, good.